Hello. Is anyone else here? Can you hear me?
Hey, Tzvi, I can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. Hi, Mitchell. How are you?
Baruch Hashem, I'm doing great. How are you?
Thank God. Great. We're going to get started here in just a second. We're still gathering everyone. I have to get this set up on Facebook briefly.
I hope your dad's not too close to you.
Not too close. Not too close.
I want you to know he was showing off your library to me the other day.
Oh, was he?
Well, we were on a video call, and I'm sure none of the other guys knew what books they were looking at in the background. But Ian, you were showing me all the books, right? You're on mute.
Yes, I kept moving the screen slightly because I didn't know if you would notice or not. No one else would know what.
Of course I noticed that. My library is not as big. It's of course fractured between what's behind me and about 4 other places around the house. So.
Yeah, and that's only half of Tzvi's. He has another half upstairs in his study, so it's quite a thing.
Okay. I see Dr. Frankel, and is it both the Frankel and the Frankels on? Yeah, you're on mute, Barry. Barry, you're on mute.
Well, now I'm going to mute it back because I'm going to be screwing around eating dinner and all those good things.
You didn't invite us to dinner. What's with that?
Well, it's I'm quarantining y'all.
Who knew that such a small thing like a global pandemic would put a crimp in your hospitality, Barry?
That's right. Well, look, I invited people for Cholin on Chassidus and nobody showed. So I had to pay all of it by myself.
I thought about walking over, but yeah. All
right, let's get started over here.
Take the video off.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. If everyone wouldn't mind muting themselves unless they're speaking, I would appreciate it so that everyone can focus on the class. Let me share our text here and we can get started. There we go. Here we have the Rebbe's Sikha that we are studying. Good evening, gentlemen. We are in the middle of studying a talk of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, one of the Rebbe's most earth-shattering, life-changing, incredible talks. And although I have been planning on teaching this to our Thursday night Chassidus class here for quite some time, I cannot pretend that this is not directly and especially relevant to our situation right now. We are living in an unprecedented situation, as I'm sure you are all familiar. And this Sikha, this talk of the Rebbe, speaks to this time in a way that few things do, because this talk of the Rebbe, this Sikha, is all about trust in God, which is something that is called bitochen, trust. What is trust? We read a short section, and we're going to read more sections in the future, God willing, from the Chavis Halavaves, the Duties of the Heart, famous medieval work of Jewish philosophy and ethics, which explained that trust in God means trust in anyone really means trust that the other person is going to do right by you, either because they promised or out of the goodness of their heart. So either way, in other words, whether you deserve it from beforehand because it was promised, or whether you don't deserve it and it hasn't been promised, but the other person is just good, you trust them to do the right thing by you. And the whole work there, the entire work of the Chavis Halavaves is explaining how the person, the thing, the entity that is most deserving of trust in the whole world is God is the creator, and really the Jew is meant to only trust the creator. Now, we're going to get into all of that more later. Let's review what we learned in our Sikha last time. We're on the second page of our Sikha. I've been translating as we go along from the Hebrew work here. Our Sikha begins by talking about the story of Moshe. We've been talking about the story of Moses, in particular, a story of Moses when he was younger, before the Jewish people leave Egypt. It's a famous story that he goes out and he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, and he strikes the Egyptian and kills the Egyptian and hides his body. And then he goes out on the next day and he sees two Jews fighting, and he says to the Jews, "Why are you fighting?" And the one of the Jews turns to him and says, "Who made you prince over us? Are you going to kill us like you killed that Egyptian?" And then we have the verse that our entire talk of the Rebbe focuses around. The verse says, Moshe was afraid, Vayira Moshe, Vayomer Achein Neda Hadavar. He said, the thing has become known. And then the story continues that Pharaoh heard about this and he sought to kill Moshe, and Moshe had to escape. And then Moshe runs away to Midian, which is where he meets his future wife Tzipora, and eventually sees the golden, the burning bush, and the story goes on from there. So we have this incident in the life of Moses, and our entire sikha is about the verse which says Moshe was afraid, and he said, the thing has become known. And we started delving into last week how Rashi explains this verse. Rashi explains this verse in two streams. Rashi says there is the simple, straightforward meaning of the verse, and then there is the midrashic meaning. In the straightforward meaning, what is the straightforward meaning of Moses, of Moshe saying, of Moshe being afraid and saying the thing has become known? What's the straightforward meaning? Who remembers? The simple meaning of the verse. Volunteers.
What he fears is the fact that Paro knows about it now, versus the complex is that now he knows that there is, as you explained, a totally different line of reasoning.
Correct. And the simple understanding, when Moses says he's afraid and the thing has become known, what is he afraid? He's afraid that Pharaoh has heard that he's killed an Egyptian. And what has become known, he's saying, oh, I thought that no one was around when I killed that Egyptian, but now that this Jew is saying to me with great chutzpah, are you going to kill me like I killed the Egyptian? So it must be that the word has got out. And that's why Moshe was afraid. He was afraid because if the word got out, Pharaoh was eventually going to hear about this and he was going to be in big trouble. That's the simple meaning of the verse. And Rashi says that the simple meaning applies. But then Rashi also brings a midrash, a more complex reading, which, as Barry said, the drush, the rabbinic reading of the verse, is a different idea altogether. When Moshe says he was afraid, what is he afraid of? He is afraid that the Jews are informers, the Jews are betrayers of each other to the Egyptians, and maybe they won't have the merit of being taken out from Egypt. And that's why he said, the thing has become known. What has become known? What has become known is the thing that he's wondered his whole life. What sin, what evil thing did the Jews do that they deserve to be slaves? And now he knows they deserve to be slaves because they all report on each other to the Egyptian authorities. That's the midrashic reading of the verse. Why was this midrashic interpretation necessary, right? As we spoke at length last week, Rashi never brings a midrashic reading of a verse unless it's absolutely necessary, because Rashi is not out to explain the midrash, or the rabbinic reading, the rabbinic system of interpretation of the Torah. Rashi is always seeks to explain the simple meaning of the verse. So when Rashi brings the simple meaning and then he says, but there's also a midrash, that's a sign that the midrash is also very important. The midrash must be necessary somehow. The midrash must answer a question in the simple meaning of the verse, otherwise Rashi wouldn't bring it. Who remembers what the question was in the simple meaning that the midrash answers? Any volunteers? This is just like a Thursday night. This is just like a regular Thursday night class. On the internet, it's no different. The thing that the midrashic explanation comes to answer, the issue with the verse that Rashi brings the midrash to explain, is that there really is no reason for the Torah to tell us that Moshe was afraid and that the thing became known. What difference does it make to the story that Moshe was afraid and the thing became known? The Torah, generally speaking, does not record emotions. And the Torah, generally speaking, doesn't record things that are said that don't have an outcome in action, right? What difference does it make that Moshe said the thing has become known? What does that add to the story, right? You could just say Pharaoh found out what happened and Pharaoh sought to kill him, and so he had to run away. Why does it have to say Moshe became afraid and he said the thing has become known? What does that add to the flow of the story? You could take the whole verse out, the story reads exactly the same. which is why Rashi has to bring the Midrash. Rashi has to explain that the Torah is teaching us other things with this verse, which is why this verse is here. And then, having read that here, the Rebbe having taught us that, the Rebbe says, however, a verse, as we know in the Torah, never leaves its simple meaning, right? There are many levels of interpretation. In general, this is an important principle to know when studying Torah, right? There are many levels of Torah interpretation, right? There's many ways in which the Torah's words are symbolic or allude to realities other than in the simple meaning of the text. But we have to know that there's a rule that however high we go and whatever deep explanations of the text we come across, the Torah never departs from its simple meaning. In other words, all the other meanings may also be true, but the simple meaning is for sure true. In other words, there is no reading a Torah verse as purely allegorical, with no simple meaning whatsoever. There's no such thing as a verse that doesn't have a simple meaning in the Torah. Right? There's no such thing as a verse that is read only not in the simple meaning, only without a straightforward take. Verses in the Torah never depart from their simple meaning. The name of the principle in Hebrew is Ein Mikra Yotze Miyedei Pshutai. Therefore, says the Rebbe, we have to explain, there must be some explanation of this verse that satisfies the simple meaning. In other words, like this. The verse, when Moshe, it says, Moshe was afraid, and Moshe said, the thing has become known, there must be a reading where this means the simple understanding. In other words, he's afraid because Pharaoh would find out, and he said, the thing has become known that he killed the Egyptian, and yet this verse still adds something to our understanding of the story. There has to be a way that this verse adds to our general understanding of the flow of events, even at the simple level. It cannot be that the verse only works in its midrashic sense. And this is what we are going to set out to discover. And by setting out to discover what this verse means in the flow of the story, we are going to delve into the depths and the richness of the concept of trust in God. So I actually want to go back. We read this last week, but let's read it again. I am on the last paragraph here. Well, you actually see where I am. So this is one thing that's easier than regular Thursday nights. You all see exactly where I am. I don't need to tell it to you. I am right here. For those of you that have your own copy, it's the last paragraph on the first column of page 2. Whenever I call out where we are, it's not going to be including the footnotes. The footnotes, as you can see on the Rebbe's Sichos, are famous and extensive. I once heard a story, actually, that they came, what was it? There was some issue of controversy where the Rebbe's opinion, as it often did, diverged from common rabbinical opinion in the land of Israel, which was something that happened fairly often. And they basically were writing this whole rabbinic letter with like dozens of signatures on it of great rabbis basically protesting something that the Rebbe was doing. I can't remember what, unfortunately. The story said what it was when I originally heard it. I can't remember. And they came to a Rav who was very famous, who lived in Yerushalayim, whose name was Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was the one of the great Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael, one of the great Rabbs in Yerushalayim. And they asked him to sign this letter against the Rebbe. And he said something to the effect of, listen, I would like to, but the Lubavitcher Rebbe is very good with his footnotes. And I'm worried that if I write this letter against him, he's going to find a footnote somehow that's going to show that I was wrong to do so. That I was incorrect in this matter. He was very nervous about the Rebbe's footnotes. That was his answer in response. So long story short, the Rebbe's footnotes are a whole category in and of themselves, as you can see here. You learn the Sikha, you learn the talk without the footnotes, and then you go back and you do the footnotes, and it's a whole new reality, a whole new world. But anyway, let's read. Let's continue where we were. We read this last week. I'm going to read it again now. Says the Holy Rebbe, says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Yesh lahakdim divrei midrash. We have to preface our understanding of our verse in the story of Moshe. We have to preface with the words of the Midrash, ala pasuk, on the verse, Vayira Yaakov me'ed v'yatzer lo, that Yaakov was very afraid and he was pained. Who was our star last week who knew what that was speaking about? I think it was Barry. This is talking about the story of Esav. Yaakov is meeting his brother Esav. And it says Yaakov was afraid, very afraid, and it pained him to meet his brother Esav. The Midrash on this verse, talking about our forefather Jacob, says as follows. Rav Pinchas v'shem Rav Ruven. Rabbi Pinchas said in the name of Rabbi Ruven, Shnei b'nei Adam havtichan HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'nisyaru. There are two people that God promised them everything was going to be okay, and yet they were still afraid. A very interesting Midrash. There's two people God promised them everything is going to be okay, and yet they were still afraid. Who were they? They were not irreligious, heretical, irrelevant people. They were the chosen one of the forefathers and the chosen one of the prophets. The chosen one of the forefathers, Zeh Yaakov. This refers to Jacob. God says to Jacob, I am with you. And in the end, he was afraid, as the verse says, and Yaakov was afraid. So God says, I am with you. And in the end, Jacob is afraid nevertheless. Habachur sheben Nevi'im, and the chosen one among the prophets, Moshe. This refers to Moses, of course, the greatest prophet who ever lived. But God says with him, I will be with you. And in the end, he was afraid. When was Moshe afraid? God tells Moshe, don't fear him. Who remembers who him is?
It was Og.
Og, very good. Og Melech HaBashan. Og, the king of Bashan. God tells him, don't be afraid. And the Midrash takes the natural conclusion from this. You don't say, don't fear him, except to someone who is afraid, right? Why is God telling Moshe, don't fear him? It can only be because it's a possibility that Moshe was afraid. So God tells Yaakov he's going to be with him, and in the end, Yaakov was afraid. God tells Moshe he's going to be with him, and in the end, Moshe was also afraid. It's a very interesting midrash, It's a very startling midrash. If the greatest of the prophets and the greatest of our holy forefathers was told directly by God that God is going to be with them and everything is going to be okay, and yet in the end they were still afraid, we could wonder, what about us? God never appeared to me directly and told me not to be afraid in the way he did to Moshe and the forefathers. This is a very enigmatic midrash. It's a very difficult midrash to understand, right? So the Rebbe is going to explain this midrash, what the midrash is actually saying. Are there any questions so far? Great. Continues the Rebbe. Upligi mefarshei midrash b'kavanas hamaimer. The explainers, the commentaries on the midrash disagree on the intention of the midrash, right? There is a disagreement among the commentaries on this midrash talking about Jacob and Moshe, Yaakov and Moshe, Jacob and Moses, what the intention of this midrash is. The Yesh Mefarshim, there are those commentators, Shezeu Shivcham Shel Yaakov and Moshe, that say this midrash praises, it's actually in praise of Yaakov and Moshe. And what's the question? The question is, how can this be in their praise, right? It says, God tells them, I'll be with you, and yet they were still afraid. So why is this a praise of Yaakov and Moshe? How is this in praise of them?
Humility.
The afal pi shehuvtachu me'es Hashem, because even though God promised them, mikol makom loy samchu ala havtacha, they nevertheless did not rely on this promise. Why? Ki yiru shema garam hachet v'shuv einam reuyim l'kiyum havtacha zu. They were afraid that perhaps they had sinned, and they were no longer deserving to the fulfillment of Hashem's promise. So in other words, why were they afraid? As Ronnie says, it's an expression of their humility. They were afraid because they were uncertain at all times that they were deserving of the blessings of Hashem. They didn't say, oh, well, God promised me, so I'm invincible. On the contrary, they were so God-fearing and so, protective of their relationship with God, that they were still worried that maybe they had done something wrong, that they didn't deserve God's protection. Therefore, this midrash is actually in praise of Yaakov and Moshe. Their fear was not because they had no faith in God. On the contrary, their fear was because, in some sense, they had no faith in themselves, right? They were so humble and so scrupulous about their own actions, they were worried maybe they themselves had not been deserving of this blessing. So that's one reading of the Midrash. Aval yesh mefarshim, says the Rebbe. However, there are those who explain it. Shekavanas hamidrash she'ein lilmod mehem shaharoi shaloi liyara. There are those who realize it, who read it and say the intention of the Midrash is that this is what's not to do. Don't learn from this Midrash. This Midrash tells us what not to do. You're not supposed to be afraid. Ela liyos, how are you supposed to be? Nachein libay betuach ba'Hashem. The way a Jew is supposed to be is they're supposed to have peace of mind and trust in God. You're not supposed to be afraid. You're supposed to trust Hashem. And the Rebbe in the bracket says he leans more towards one of these interpretations. This second explanation, which says that this midrash is what not to do, this midrash is a criticism, so to speak, not a praise. This is implied by the continuation of the simple. This is implied directly by the continuation of the midrash. Shemevi ma shehanavi mekanter. Am I pronouncing that right, Ronnie?
Yes.
Shehanavi mekanter es Yisrael ve'emer lehem v'tishkach Hashem eisecha, where the midrash continues and it talks about how the prophet upbraided. He rebuked the Jews. And he said to them, you forgot Hashem, your maker. V'tivcha tamid kol hayom, and you were always afraid. That the prophet rebuked the Jews for being always afraid. They should have trusted in God. Right? So in other words, because the Midrash continues on and says the prophet rebuked them for not having enough trust, it would seem that the beginning of the Midrash is on the same theme, right? When it talks about Moses and Yaakov, it's on the same theme. They didn't have enough trust. So this Midrash appears to say, according to some rabbinic opinions, the ones who read it according to the simple continuation of the text, this Midrash appears to criticize the greatest of the forefathers and the greatest of the prophets. And it appears to say they were afraid when they shouldn't have been. They should have trusted in God. They should not have feared, because God promised them that everything would be okay. Continues the Rebbe. V'yesh la'ayin b'das ha'mefarshim shaharoi shaloi lira. The ma'a chisaron b'kach shecheshesh shema garam hachet. We have to now, so this is another little piece of Talmudic logic here in our Chassidus class, right? Now that you've said that the one opinion seems more correct, which says that they were afraid wrongly. They were afraid in ways that they shouldn't have been. They should have trusted in Hashem. Now you have to explain why that opinion doesn't agree with the one that we disagree with. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, the reason why the other opinion said that fearing Hashem was a good thing was why? Because they were humble. They were worried maybe they had sinned. Right? Now we're saying, so why doesn't the other opinion in the Midrash agree with that first opinion? In other words, that seems like a good argument. It seems like a good argument. They were afraid that they had sinned. So why should they trust in Hashem? Maybe they didn't deserve his blessing. Right? That's exactly what the Rebbe asks. We have to look more deeply into the opinion of the commentators who say that it's better they shouldn't have feared. Because what's wrong with this, that they were worried maybe sin caused me to be undeserving of Hashem's blessing. Seemingly that's a good argument. Says the Rebbe. On the contrary, it seems the opposite. It's an incredibly great quality. That so great was the humility of Moshe and Yaakov, of Moses and Jacob. They were always afraid maybe their worship of God was not complete, their service of God was not perfect, and it had some sort of lack, it had some sort of sin. In other words, this seems to be a very, very good argument. This seems to be a great praise of Moshe and Yaakov. So why don't the other commentaries on the Midrash, how do they deal with this idea is the question. How do we explain that even though they may have had sins, and even though they were so exacting with themselves, which is a great quality of character. It shows how holy and exacting and disciplined Yaakov and Moshe were, and humble in not assuming that they were perfect. How can we say that all of that really doesn't matter and they should have had faith in God anyway? That's the question. Continues the Rebbe. Ach, shaila zu hi bechlolus midas habitachon shenitztave ba. This question is in general the trait of trust in God on which we are commanded. In other words, this question is not just a question arising from a particular midrash about Moshe and Yaakov. This question is actually a question on a whole facet of Jewish faith. In other words, the Rebbe is saying there is a whole aspect of Judaism, a whole commandment of Judaism that, according to this question, seems not to make sense. The question is not just on Jacob and Moshe from one midrash. It's a question really on a whole general principle of Judaism. An entire aspect of Judaism seems to be under fire from this question. L'chaim. How is what facet of Judaism is under fire? It is the mitzvah of trust in God, right? What is the mitzvah of trust in God? Continues the Rebbe. Pirush bitachon, hu ena rak emuna beyecheles Hashem lahativay ulichlatzay mitzara chulu. Now, the Rebbe is making a very important distinction. Trust in God is not the same as faith in God. You have the Hebrew word bitachon is trust in God. The Hebrew word emunah is faith in God. And they are simply not the same thing. They are not the same concept. What is emunah? What is faith in God? Faith in God, says, the Rebbe says here, at least in our context, is emunah beyecheles Hashem la'ativay ulechaltei mitzara. Faith in God is faith in God's ability to do good to us and to rescue us from pain and suffering, from trouble. Faith means, I believe there is a God who is of infinite power. If he wants, he can save me at any moment. That's faith, right? Faith is that there is someone who is greater and more powerful and more eternal than all of the finite powers of the world. So whatever trouble I get into, that being who is God can rescue me from that trouble. That's called faith. This definition of faith, by the way, ties in with the definition of faith we had earlier in this class a few months ago, probably a year ago now, when we were studying the Maimer of the Tzemach Tzedek, when we were studying about the mitzvah of faith in God. There we said, what's faith? Faith is the soul's ability to connect to Hashem beyond intellect, beyond reason. And really, these two things are connected. These two explanations are not really two different explanations, two different definitions of faith. The two definitions are connected. Again, the two definitions are, in what we're learning right now, he says, what's faith? Faith is faith in the ability of God to do good and rescue me from evil. And over there, in that other discourse, we said faith in general is the soul's ability to connect to God beyond the intellect in a supra-rational way, in an infinite way. And these two things are really connected. Why? Why are these two things connected? Who wants to take a stab at it?
Because one cannot exist without the other.
Go on. What does that mean?
If you don't have faith in God, you can trust God.
No. We're not talking about trust. We're not even talking about trust yet. We're talking about two definitions of faith right now. Two definitions of faith. One definition of faith is that God is able to rescue me from any trouble I'm in. The other definition of faith is the soul's connection to God beyond reason, beyond the intellect, the supra-rational, the infinite connection of the soul with God. Why are these two things connected? These two things are connected because the ability for God to save me, if it's really to be an unchanging faith, right? If I'm really to believe that God can save me in any situation, how does my relationship with God have to be? My relationship with God has to be super rational. It has to be non-intellectual. It has to be beyond the intellect, beyond the rational mind. Why? Because the rational mind, being rational, judges the ability of someone to save me by the nature of the situation, right? In other words, my rational intellect in some situation says, I can see the way that God could save me in this situation, right? If I'm in a situation where there's people love statistics nowadays, so you could do it statistically, right? There's a 50% chance, or there's a 97% chance that I'll be okay in this situation. Oh, there's lots of room for Hashem to save me. It's fantastic, right? In this situation, I can believe that God can rescue me. What about in a situation where there's a 0% chance statistically that you'll be saved? Right? In other words, there is no intellectual room. There's no room rationally to say God can save me. If your belief that God can save you is purely intellectual, then it disappears, right? So you don't really believe God can save you. You believe you can be saved through certain means and through certain measures, right? You don't really believe God can save you. You believe it's the 97% chance. That's where your salvation will come from. It's the mathematical percentages, right? It's the rules. It's the natures of things, the way the things play out, right? You have a certain chance of surviving in this situation, so that chance God can work in. But if there's a 0% chance rationally that God can work in this situation, then there's no room, so to speak, for God to save me. If the belief is rational, right? If the belief is based on my assessment of the natures of things, of the statistical likelihoods, of the chances of being rescued, the chances of being saved. Which is why faith in God, the faith that God has the ability to save me, no matter what happens, is the same as the soul's super-rational relationship with Hashem. The soul believes Hashem can save it even when, and especially when, it doesn't understand how Hashem can save it. I don't see, with my rational mind, I don't see the percent. There's a 0% chance rationally that God can save me. And nevertheless, I still believe with perfect faith that God has the ability to save me in this situation. I cannot describe to you rationally what that ability is, because it's not rational. It's not a finite ability. There is no explanation of how God can save me. God is beyond explanations. God can save me even when there's no explanation, right? If the Jews at the splitting of the sea had emunah, right, there's a 0% chance that if we walk through this water, we won't drown, and instead are going to go through on dry land and make it through to the other side. There's a 0% chance, right? Rationally in that situation, without faith, you begin to have doubts, right? Without faith, you begin to say, look, there's no way God could save me in this situation. There's no way. There's a sea in front of me. There's an army behind me. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go, right? Faith means that the soul always believes this, the godly soul, and we can get in touch with our godly soul. The soul knows that even in this situation, God can split the sea and I can walk through on dry land. That's faith. Faith is God has the ability to save me in any situation because he's God, not because I see or I understand the way that he can save me. That's faith. That's not even trust yet. That's just faith, right? I believe it says, I can't remember where it says, it's either the Talmud or a Midrash. It says that even if the executioner, or even if the sword is on your neck, right? In other words, you're about to be executed, you should still have faith that God can rescue you. You should still have hope. The Jew is still expected to know deeply that God can save him from this situation, right? That's faith. Faith is there is a God who is beyond all understanding. He's beyond all of my plans, all of my reasons, all of my explanations. And he, if he wants to, he can save me. That's faith. That's faith. What then is trust? What then is bitachon? Continues the Rebbe. Ella shebeteach beHashem shekein yase befeil shehadavar vaday etzlei ad shehu b'menucha gemura ve'enoi deeg klal. Trust is even more than faith. As we're actually going to see, trust is really totally different from faith, as we're going to see. Trusting in God means that God will actually save me in actuality, that the thing will certainly take place. And the person is so certain that God will save them that they are totally at peace and they are not worried at all, right? You understand the difference? Let's use it in our two examples. Our two examples that we had were by the splitting of the sea, right? And when the person has the sword on their neck, a similar situation, basically. One's just a bit more abstract, slightly more abstract than the other, right? So you have a situation where you don't see a way out, right? Every Jew has to have emunah. Emunah means God could find a way out even if I can't see it. That's what faith means. That's emunah. Emunah is God can rescue me here no matter what my assessment of the situation is. But a Jew also has to have bitachon. What's bitachon? What's trust? Trust is not only can he split the sea, not only can he save me from the sword that's against my neck, but he actually will. That's trust. Trust is not that he can rescue me. Trust is that he certainly will rescue me. He for sure will rescue me, and I'm so certain that he'll rescue me that I'm actually not worried, I'm not concerned in this situation at all. God will certainly rescue me from this situation. God will certainly do good for me, not just that he has the ability to. The ability to is emunah. That's faith. Faith is he can if he wants to, right? That's faith. Faith means he's a very big God. He can do whatever he wants. He's totally beyond my understanding, and he can do whatever he wants. That's faith. Trust is he will save me. Not just he can, he will. That's the difference between faith and trust. As is explained in the duties of the heart. I'm going to read you, this is the words that I read you last week in English. We'll read them again now. The essence of trust is the peace of mind. The menuchas hanefesh literally means the resting of the soul. So I'll translate as peace of mind. The essence of trust is the peace of mind of the one who trusts. One's heart should depend on the person whom he trusts, that he will do the right thing by him, he will do what is good and right by him in the thing about which he trusts. He will do right by me about the matter in which I trust Hashem. Right? This is what trust is. And let me tell you, the rest of this sikha, the rest of this talk of the Rebbe is going to be trying to wrap our minds around how crazy this concept is. This whole concept is unbelievably radical, and it's not just radical in Chassidus, it was radical in the Middle Ages when the Chovos HaLevavos wrote about it, right? Nearly hundreds and hundreds of years ago. This concept is an incredible concept. No matter what I am facing in life, no matter the challenges or the dangers or the struggles I face, not only can God rescue me from this situation, which is one thing, but I am certain and I trust that he will. Right? So let's begin to explore some of the difficulties, what's so difficult to understand about this concept, why this is such a profound concept. Continues the Rebbe, v'tzarich bir. We need explanation. What is the foundation of this person's certainty? How can the person be so certain? How is that possible, right? Continues the Rebbe. The kevan she'afilu sheyesh haftacha mufureshes me'es Hashem yitachen sheloi siskayim haftacha shema garam hachet. Since even when God himself promises to you that everything's going to be fine, like he did to Moshe and like he did to Yaakov, like he did to Moses and Jacob, as we read before, it's possible that that promise will not be fulfilled because maybe I have performed a sin. Maybe I've done something that I will not deserve this blessing. Right? So now we're tying this back into our midrash, right? Our midrash really presents an incredible difficulty to the concept of bitachon. God tells you you're not supposed to just have faith. You're not just supposed to know beyond all rational reason that I can rescue you in any situation. You have to trust that in fact I will do so. Comes the midrash and says, God promises to Moshe and Yaakov, I'm going to be with you, everything's going to be fine. And they were so humble and so concerned about their own sins and their own behavior, they worried they didn't deserve the blessing. Now, if Yaakov and Moshe, right, the greatest of the forefathers and the greatest of the prophets, people whose greatness we really have no conception of, is the truth. The truth is we really have no idea. We have no idea. The greatness is incomparable. We can't even speak about it as the truth. We have no conception of how great they were whatsoever. These people were so worried, they were so concerned about their own sin that they were still afraid. They were still worried God wouldn't help them. So how is Ronnie and Mitchell and Tzvi and Daryl and Sean and everyone else that's here, how are we supposed to deal with, how are we supposed to handle this command that you're supposed to trust in God, that God will certainly save you? There were people who God told explicitly everything is going to be all right, and they were still worried. Why? Not because they doubted God, because they doubted they themselves were deserving, right? You see how this midrash is an incredible question on the whole concept of trust in God. The whole concept that anyone can be certain God will help them. How is that possible? We have sins. We have things we've done wrong. There's plenty of reasons for God to say that person is not deserving of blessing, right? If Moshe and Jacob were concerned about it, certainly we should be concerned about it, right? It's not even a comparison, right? So how can it be a commandment? How can it be an obligation of every Jew to trust that God not only can, but certainly will do good for them? If every Jew has this concern, the Midrash talks about, maybe I sinned and don't deserve it. Hear the question? It's a good question, no? Are there any questions so far? These are far fewer questions than when we learn in person. I don't know why. Okay, I guess you guys are really holding your peace. You guys are really serious about this. All right, let's go on then. Let's go on. Continues the Rebbe. V'harei chashash zeh, this worry, d'shema garam hachet, that maybe I sinned, kayam etzel kol echad ve'echad, exists by each and every person. U'kamasha kosev, as the verse says, ein tzadik ba'aretz, asher yaseh tev v'lo yechta. The verse says, famous verse from Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, verse 20, as the footnote 29 says. It says, there is no righteous person on the earth who does good and does not hate, does not sin. The simple translation is sin, right? But of course, we know from learning Tanya, we know from Chassidus and from the Alter Rebbe, that the tzaddik, even the Beinani, is someone that doesn't actually sin. Never mind the tzaddik. So what does the verse mean when it says the tzaddik, the saintly man, right? There's no saintly man who does good and doesn't sin. It doesn't mean sin literally. What it means is a spiritual lack. What it means is that no one's perfect. Even what we call the perfect tzaddik, even he is not perfect. There's always more that he could have done. There's always a higher level that he could have ascended to. There is no one on the earth who has no lacks, who is not imperfect in some way, who could not be better. Even if they're perfectly good, they could still be better, right? So because of this principle, because of this verse in Koheles and Ecclesiastes, which says that there's always room to be better. No one has reached the pinnacle of perfection that they can't go any further. It's impossible, right? Therefore, it is a concern for each and every individual that maybe they have done something wrong. Maybe their lack, maybe their own imperfection makes them undeserving of God's salvation, of God rescuing them from that trouble, of having bitachon, right? Says the Rebbe, the Mikol Shekain v'Kal v'Chemer mizeh shafilu Yaakov Avinu chashash shema garam hachet, right? From a Kal v'Chemer, if Yaakov Avinu, if Jacob our forefather was worried, maybe he sinned, I think we can all be concerned, right? That's what the Rebbe is saying. If Jacob was concerned, there's room for people like us. We can also be concerned. This is also a live worry, right? Yaakov Avinu, of course, Jacob was a perfect merkava, a perfect chariot for godliness. He never moved a finger in his whole life. That wasn't the explicit will of God, right? And yet he was still worried. Maybe he had done something that he wasn't deserving of the blessing, right? He wasn't deserving of being rescued. I think we could find sufficient grounds if we looked at our own lives carefully enough. Are we all clear until this point? Because things are about to become less clear. So before they become less clear, we should make sure we're clear now. Are you with me? Someone talk to me, just so I know this microphone's on.
I'm with you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank God. Good to know. All right. Ois Gimel, chapter 3 of this Sikha, of this talk of the Rebbe. I'll make this go away. There we go. Oh, I wanted it to go away. There we go. Seemingly, we can explain this. What is when the Rebbe says seemingly we can explain this? What does that immediately tell you? It means this explanation is not going to be the final explanation, right? Because the Rebbe is starting it. Seemingly we can explain this, right? So just be aware that what we are saying now is going to be a topic of. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be like the tzaddik ba'aretz. This is not the perfect answer to the question. Seemingly, we can explain as follows, right? The Rebbe often in his talks uses these answers, which are not the final answer, to clarify and to give us a clearer path towards what the final answer to the question is, right? Our question, one more time, just in case, is how can we be commanded to have trust in God, that God will certainly save us if even Jacob was worried maybe he had sinned and didn't deserve it? That's the question. Seemingly, we can explain it as follows. Inyan habitachen meyusad ala emunah. The concept of trust is founded on faith. Shehakol me'es habere yizbarech, that everything comes from God. That when a person finds themselves in a place of in dire straits and in difficulties, it is not because there is power or dominion, God forbid, says the Rebbe, chas v'shalom, God forbid, to the person who is giving him trouble, in whatever way that trouble or strife is coming. Rather, everything that happens comes from God. This is also a concept of faith. Right? Before we said faith is faith in the ability of God to rescue me in any situation. Faith has another aspect as well. There's another aspect to the super rational connection of the soul with God, which is the faith that everything that happens to me is by God's decree. Right? It's the faith that no one has the ability to harm or hurt me, right, without God's consent. The Gemara says that when a Jew in this world, or maybe even a human being, I can't remember the language of the Gemara exactly, stubs their toe or stubs their finger, it says, when a person in this world stubs their finger, it's only because the heavenly court has decreed that they should stub their finger, right? In other words, there is no trouble or suffering that comes to a person in this world that is not by God's consent. And God forbid to say that the person who brings you this trouble is the one who actually has the power to cause you trouble. In other words, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, I believe in Ageres HaKodesh chapter 25, if I remember correctly, the fourth part of the Tanya, the 25th letter there, the Alter Rebbe explains that even if someone walks up to you, like you're walking in the street, right, under a situation of non-social distancing, it wouldn't happen now. I think people are too worried. But under a normal situation, you're walking in the street, someone walks up to you, someone you don't know, slaps you in the face. Right? You're walking in the street, someone walks up to you, slaps you in the face. The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, you should not get angry. Why? Because anger is like idol worship. Why is anger like idol worship? Anger is like idol worship because when you're getting angry at the person that slapped you in the face, what you're essentially saying is that they were able to act without God consenting to you having been slapped in the face, right? It's like idolatry. There is a power other than God namely Shmerel, the guy who slaps me in the face. Shmerel is a power outside of God. Shmerel is able to slap me in the face without God's consent. God didn't sign off on it. Shmerel is able to just walk up to me and slap me. God was looking the other way. He was busy doing something else. Right? And Shmerel was able to slap me, right? That's called something like idolatry, right? That's the taste of idol worship. You're saying that God does not have absolute power, right? Absolute knowledge and absolute power over everything that takes place in the universe, which is something that Jews have absolute and perfect and simple faith in. Jews believe quite simply that everything that occurs to me in my life, right, is by the decree of God. Nothing happens to me by accident or, God forbid, by the power of something other than God. So if someone slaps me in the face, it's because God decreed that I deserve to be slapped in the face. Why then can I take Shmerel to court for damages? Right, which is the halachic question, right? People who study the Talmud know if I get bruised or if I get damaged or I get embarrassed by Shmerel slapping me in the face, I could take him to Beis Din, right? I could take him to court theoretically. If he has no responsibility, right, he could argue it's God who slapped me in the face. I've told you the famous story of the Chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, right, before. The Chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek who borrowed the money and then said it never happened because the whole world doesn't exist, right? Everything is just godliness. I think I've told you the story before. Right, there's a Chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, the Chassid of the third Rebbe of Chabad, and he borrows money from another Chassid, and the other Chassid comes time to get the payment back, and he says, "What about that money I lent you?" The Chassid said, "You never lent me money." The guy says, "Very funny, but stop messing around. Where's my money?" And the Chassid said, "You never loaned me money. I never took money from you. There never was any money. Einod milvadei." Everything is godliness. The whole thing never happened because everything just comes from God, right? He said, everything comes from God. Everything is just Hashem. The loan never happened. There's no you, there's no me, there's no money, so I don't need to pay you back. And he thought he was joking, but he was actually serious or pretending he was serious. So this chassid brought him before the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, and they brought him to the Rebbe. And he told the Rebbe this argument that he doesn't need to pay back the money because everything is just godliness. And the Tzemach Tzedek told him that, you think everything is godliness. You think everything is nothing. So we'll take this nothing, he points to the guy, we'll bend him over this nothing, we'll hit him with this nothing, and we'll see if nothing is still nothing, right? In other words, it's very easy to say everything is nothing, everything is godly, but we, of course, in Yiddishkeit believe there's personal responsibility. We believe that if you borrowed money, you're obligated to pay that money back, right? So how do these two things go together is my question to you. This is basic Chassidus. This is not very advanced stuff, but it's stuff that you have to know, right? You have to know. So if Shmerel walks up, the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, again, back to Shmerel, our friend Shmerel. The Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, if Shmerel walks up to you in the street and slaps you in the face, it's not Shmerel slapping you in the face. Don't be angry at Shmerel. Because God decreed that you were going to get slapped in the face. If Shmerel hadn't slapped you in the face, the pain and the trouble and everything else would have come to you in a different way. Shmerel's just the messenger. Really, God decreed that you should be slapped in the face. Shmerel has no ability to hurt you whatsoever without God's permission. So therefore, really, it's God who's responsible, not Shmerel who's responsible. So why then can I take Shmerel to the court? And the answer in Chassidus is, it's very simple. Because Shmerel has free choice. What's his free choice? His free choice is whether he wants to be the vessel for this trouble coming to me or not. In other words, his moral obligation is to not be the means by which this pain comes to another Jew. That's his moral obligation, right? It's true, he's only a vessel. He wouldn't have succeeded if God didn't allow it. He wouldn't have succeeded to hurt me if God didn't decree that I deserve to be hurt. But he didn't have to be the vessel for that hurt. That he could have decided to stay home and not slap me. That hurt could have come in a different way. It could have come to me in a different fashion. The fact that he chose to be the vessel, he chose to be the conduit, he chose to participate in it, that's why we can take him to Beis Din. That's why he may need to be punished. That's why he may need to pay, right? Because he had perfect free choice whether he was going to be the means for this or God would have had to have found another way for it to come about, but it didn't have to come through him. And that's essentially what we explain. That's what the human being's free choice is. That's what our free choice is. Our free choice is essentially what aspects of Hashem's plan we choose to participate in. which ends that are predetermined do we participate in bringing about? What divine result do we participate in being the conduit for? That's essentially what our free choice is, right? So let's get back to our Sikha then. The Rebbe says, trust is founded on faith. The faith that no one in the world has power to harm me, God forbid, that no one has the power, the dominion, the shlita. No one has the ability to harm me without God's permission. Everything comes from Hashem. All the things that happen to me come from God, right? As the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya. Uba Mela, and thus automatically, hu b'menucha gemura. When a person knows this, they are at peace. Ki mimanavshach. Because mimanavshach. Ronnie, how do you translate mimanavshach?
Not sure.
You're not sure, or the translation is you're not sure?
I'm not sure how to translate it.
Okay. L'chaim to that. Mimanavshach is a language from the Gemara. It's very difficult to translate. It's a very useful term, which we use all the time, which people who study Gemara use in English because it's so useful. Even though it doesn't really have a good English translation. Mimanavshach means either way you want it. It's a form of, it's philosophically or logically, I think it's called a fork. It's called a fork. It's a type of argument, right? It's called some kind of a fork or it's like a pincer type argument. Mimanavshach basically says that I'm going to give you one of two options, and either way it comes to this conclusion. In other words, either way you have it. Mimanavshach literally means, in literal translation, means what do you want is really what it means. Mimanavshach, like from what is your desire? Either way you want to have it. Either way you look at it, the conclusion is such and such. That's what mimanavshach means. So the Rebbe says it's a mimanavshach. It's a mimanavshach. I'll give you an example of a mimanavshach right here. If the person does not deserve anything bad to happen to them, certainly God will save them, right? Because you're not deserving of any bad thing happening to you. And this is true, as we said before, even when there is no room within the law of nature to be rescued. Who will tell God what he can do or not? No one tells God what he's able to do. He's able to change the nature. He can split the sea. It doesn't matter if you know that you are not deserving any bad thing coming to you. Nothing in the world can hurt you, because God, everything that has the ability to hurt you can only hurt you with God's consent, right? Right? So if I didn't do anything bad, then I know nothing bad will happen to me because everything comes from God. There's justice in this world. This world is not like a random jungle where things just happen, right? This world is a place of order. God rules the world. Everything that happens to me comes from God. So if everything that happens to me comes from God, and I don't deserve anything bad to happen to me, so I'm at peace. I'm at peace because nothing bad is going to happen. I don't deserve anything bad, so nothing bad will happen. And if you don't deserve God's kindness, and you do deserve to be punished, right? Which is already a level to admit this. Most of us lie to ourselves and tell us we're perfect and we don't deserve any punishment, right? If the person is real with themselves and says, okay, maybe I'm not so great. Maybe there's one or two things I did. Maybe I might deserve some punishment. Right? He is still at perfect peace. Why? Because he knows that his pain doesn't come from the immediate physical cause of the pain. It's not shmerel that's slapping me. Rather, the pain comes only from God. Right? The pain and the trouble comes only from God. And because I did not fulfill my obligations to God, this trouble has come. I'm deserving this trouble. This trouble came to me. And if so, you only fear God. And furthermore, and this itself is for the good. As we know, even the punishments of the Torah are the kindness of Hashem. Why? Because God's punishments cleanse us of the blemish of sin, of transgression. And if so, there's no room to worry. So this is a classic mimanavshach, right? Either way, Either way, the person is at peace, right? If you have emunah in Hashem, you're at peace, either way, right? Why? Because if you deserve to be hurt, right, then you know that it's only God who is able to hurt me, right? It's only in the way of justice. And not only that, but God's punishments are able to cleanse me. They're actually, in a way, a good thing coming from God, as we can learn, as we learn in Chassidus a lot, right? That even the punishments of Hashem are a form of kindness, right? They're a form of blessing, because God doesn't just punish as a vengeful God, God forbid. Such a thing is totally antithetical to Judaism, certainly in the Chassidic understanding of Judaism. God doesn't punish us because he wants to hurt us. On the contrary, God punishes us because he loves us. God punishes us only because he wants to cleanse us of transgression. He wants to clean us of the bad things we've become entangled with. So if you deserve to be hurt, if you deserve bad things to come your way, right, then faith tells you that whatever bad comes your way will come from God. You don't need to be worried about the stock market or shmerel or serial killers or aliens or whatever it is you're so worried about, right? I'm giving humorous examples. There's many real things to be worried about. You could probably find them in the news very easily. So you don't need to be worried about the cause of the immediate cause that's in the news that says you're going to be punished, bad things are going to happen to you, because you know that even if you deserve something bad to happen to you, it's not that thing which is going to punish me. It's only God, the same God that's always been here. The God who was here before the thing that's in the news is the God that's here when there's the thing in the news, right? Before there was this immediate cause, before Shmerel walked up here, God also was determining my faith. And now that Shmerel is here, Shmerel is just the vessel for what was coming to me anyway. So why should I worry, in other words, right? In other words, it's not, if you're worried about this, you should be worried about every second that you're alive. You should have fear of God, which is not a bad thing, by the way. I don't know if it's worrying. I don't know if it has to be so neurotic, but the in other words, it's not, you shouldn't be worried about any worldly cause. What are you worried about, right? God is in total control of everything. So if you deserve something bad to happen to you, you know that it only comes from God anyway. So why should any worldly thing cause me to worry? Right? And if I'm not deserving of anything bad to happen to me, then it doesn't matter what worldly thing is taking place, because none of them can hurt me anyway, because it's all in the hands of God. Classic Mimon of Shach. Either I'm good or I'm bad. Either way I have it, I still shouldn't be worried. That's emunah. All of this is faith. We haven't got to bitachon yet. This was all prefaced by saying trust, bitachon, is founded on emunah, is based on a foundation of emunah, of faith, and faith tells us this Mimon of Shach. Faith tells us everything that happens to me comes from God. So either way, I shouldn't be worried, right? I think that's a good lesson to end this week's class with, God willing. And next week we will continue in Yirtzeh Hashem, and we'll have to get a little more confused, a little more complicated, our vision of things, before we can get clarity and the amazing, incredible further lessons of this Sikha. Are there any questions before we sign off? All right, in that case, I wish all of you a beautiful Shabbos and a beautiful week, God willing, and we will meet together next week, whether online or at the shul or in Yerushalayim. Either way, the plan is we will meet next week on Thursday. What did you say?
Tomorrow in Farbrengen.
And tomorrow, the afternoon, there is a Farbrengen. Please see the, you can find out the information about that from Ronnie. Ronnie has volunteered to give out information on that to everyone.
And thank you for the class, Rabbi Tzvi.
Have a wonderful week, everyone, and a good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.
Thank you.
Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.